We have come into times like those you have never in your lifetimes experienced before. As a matter of fact, in history, there's nothing in all modern European history, globally extended, to compare with what is happening globally and in the United States as well right now. There's been nothing like the crisis that faces us today since a comparable crisis in Europe during the medieval period called the New Dark Ages. We are on the verge of a complete collapse of the entire planet into a new dark age. So that's the situation we face. Now, what are the remedies? What are the alternatives? There are some excellent alternatives, but there are no alternatives for Wall Street. Wall Street has earned its death. It is a dead, stinking fish lying in the streets of Lower Manhattan. The investment banking system is dead, and it should have been killed before it rotted into death. Now, the third thing, which is the big one, which is of crucial importance right now, is I propose that the United States approach Russia, China, and India as the big four power of this planet. Not to establish a dictatorship by these four powers, but to take a group of four nations, which aggregately are so powerful, the world has to listen to them and obey some of the suggestions they make. They would immediately be supported in these kinds of measures by Japan, by Korea, and by some nations in Europe, some forces in Italy, some forces in France, like President Sarkozy of France right now. The thing there. There's a movement in Italy, also organized by the finance minister of Italy, which is moving in the same direction. The Italian motion is directly done in my name. That is the idea of a new Bretton Woods, as my policy is specified by a motion, a bill, presented in the Italian Senate now for a new Bretton Woods system. Now, that is the solution, the key to the solution to this situation internationally. We have a world system. The entire system is bankrupt. The entire world monetary financial system is already in a Weimar-style hyperinflationary takeoff. We are weeks or so away from a crisis beyond belief. And all the troops that Bush might wish to deploy to the streets to try to get that bill through will not save the United States from destruction by the effects of his doing that. Therefore, we need the cooperation of Russia, China, and India as a big four around which other nations can gather and simply get rid of the opposition to doing this. It's in the interest of the people of the world, so why not mobilize the major part of the world's population in these and other nations combined? And let's say the people of the world, through their respective national governments, agree this is going to be stopped. What would we do? We would take a leaf out of the book of President Franklin Roosevelt, who's much smarter than these jerks that we now have in government today. And has some better supporters then, too. We would then say we're going to set up as what the language is in Russia, in Italy, and from the President of France, and from others, a new Bretton Woods system. And they mean a new Franklin Roosevelt Bretton Woods system. Nothing different. The difference between that and what Truman did is notable. What Roosevelt did, Roosevelt followed the Constitution. Now let me explain what the problem was then, because it's relevant to understanding the problem today. Roosevelt's intention during the war was to engage in a reluctant alliance with the British in order to crush the Nazis and some other pestilences running loose. But Roosevelt's intention was also at the end of the war to eliminate colonialism and everything like it from the planet. Now, we had, as some as you are old enough to remember, very few of you, I guess, you have to be my generation and so forth to remember that, we had launched as a recovery measure from the depression created by Coolidge and Hoover and people like that, which we used as our mobilization, with the role of Harry Hopkins and others, to mobilize the United States economically to prepare for our obligation to deal with this menace of Hitler and so forth in Europe and in the world in general. We created, from the poor people of our streets, through Harry Hopkins and other Roosevelt programs, we created the greatest economic machine, physical, productive economic machine the world had ever known in our United States. Yes, we had allies that were dependent upon and so forth, but it was the margin of the United States mobilization by Roosevelt which enabled us to defeat Hitler and similar problems. Roosevelt's intention was to get the root of these global problems by eliminating the power of British imperialism. And that was the big fight between Roosevelt and Churchill all during the war. So Roosevelt's intention, as he said clearly, was at the end of the war, as he said to Winston, at the end of the war, Winston, no more British crap. People are going to be freed. There are going to be no more colonies. We're going to use the mighty military war machine, productive machine of the United States to free people, to enable them to develop, to gain their freedom, to eliminate colonies from this planet, and to allow nations to develop to the full dignity of mankind. Now, we didn't do that at the end of the war because Truman was a Churchill lover. He's a bum, too. He was only stuck in because he was a right-winger, and Roosevelt was under pressure in 1944 from the right wing, which was resurgent at that point. And they put this character, Truman, in place. And Truman kissed the butt of Winston Churchill. There's no bones about it. He may kiss some other things, too, but the butt was noted. We worked with the British and the Dutch to recolonize the planet, to restore the British Empire, which is what the Anglo-Dutch system is. And what we did in the United States, instead of converting our war machine into production for the world and its development, we shut large parts of it down. We took the war debt we had inherited from the war, but we shut down the means of getting rid of that debt by converting military potential into industrial and related potential. But we do need something else. We need the mobilization of the productive power of the United States, which is largely machine tool design and related things, to build our infrastructure, to build systems, to build a railroad system to replace this crazy highway system, to fix our river systems, which are about to collapse, to restore our agriculture, to rebuild manufacturing and similar activities in the United States instead of make work, to rebuild our nation as in the American tradition, not the British slavery tradition, which we're operating under now. Now, faced with a period in which, under the present system, U.S. dollar is right now essentially worthless. It's not become worthless, but it's becoming worthless, and there's nothing underneath there to stop it from falling. As a matter of fact, the Secretary of the Treasury is causing the dollar to fall at an ever-accelerating rate. We are in hyperinflation now. Like Weimar in the autumn of 1923, the world is in a hyperinflationary spiral, and it's going to blow out. Now, what do we do? What do we do with the four-power agreement? And Russia is ready to agree to this. Now, forces in Italy and France have declared themselves for it. What they mean by that is still up for some discussion, but it's there. China will support that, but not unless the United States comes in on it, because China is concerned about the price of the dollar. because China depends largely upon its trade with the United States. India would join it. If Russia joins it, these countries would join it. If this big four, joined quickly by other nations, comes to an agreement, we will put the entire world into bankruptcy reorganization. We will create an intention to form what we would call a new Bretton Woods system. We will use the power of international government, that is not in an international agency, but the power of government pulled together as an international force. We will use that force to regulate a fixed currency system throughout the planet. We will put the lid on hyperinflation. We will keep the banks of countries open, the real banks, not the fake ones. We will build the economy by measures of economy building, large-scale needed infrastructure projects, using high technology, using engineering design. This will be a rebuilding of the world economy. We will create new credit, not the fake credit you've been getting lately, but new credit at low interest rates, long-term, just as we did under Roosevelt, to launch the employment in each country under a fixed exchange rate system, which allows us to rapidly build back the productive power of nations. And yes, we are going to take time to clean this mess up that we have today. It'll probably take 2 generations before we fully eliminate the results of the corruption which has been dumped upon us in the past 40 years. Now we have a global situation in which there has been an implicit shift of power. A shift of power from Europe and the Americas toward Asia. The future of the planet lies in the development of Russia, China, India, and other Asian countries. These are areas of large populations of which 60 to 70% or more are extremely poor, poorly developed. This represents a social crisis, a planetary social crisis, with all kinds of side effects possible. But if we're going to have a successful planet, we have to concentrate on large-scale infrastructure projects and similar things which will, over 2 generations, raise the productive powers of labor of populations from all around the world. This means that the major investment in the planet in the period now will become first in Asia. Second, the second largest component will be Black Africa, especially Black Africa. The third component will be development in Central and South America. The United States and Western Europe must be mobilized as a driver, an economic driver, as well as a political driver, to bring about the success of development of the whole planet by what we do in support of the development in South and Central America, in Africa, and in Asia. We need a new mission for mankind. We don't have any enemies in the world who are any worse, any more our enemies than President George Bush is. It is the people who are leading, who are controlling us, and the British, the Anglo-Dutch liberals. These characters are inducing us to destroy ourselves. We don't have real enemies in Asia as nations. We don't have real enemies in South America. We don't have real enemies in Africa, not if we think like Franklin Roosevelt. If we think like Roosevelt, we don't have enemies there. These are our friends. And our government is our enemy. So essentially, what we have, if the American people are able to stand up to this, as many of the people from the lower income brackets, as represented by in the Congress and the House of Representatives, are able to push through the changes that are necessary, I can guarantee you absolutely, if that change is made, Russia will fully cooperate. China will cooperate. India will cooperate. Then Japan will cooperate. Korea will cooperate. Other nations will cooperate. The nations of Africa will greet this as they're about being mass murdered now under British policy. They will rejoice at our coming back in the picture in this way. The world will be on the side of the United States. Now, the other thing we have to appreciate is what our United States is. So now there was a split, and the split occurred in 1763, in February 1763, with the Treaty of Paris, the Peace of Paris, in which we in the United States, or what became the United States, broke with England because England had become an empire and was trying to loot us here in what became the United States. Because of this cultural factor, the dominant characteristic of global civilization has been English language leadership and control of global civilization from that time to the present day, especially from 1763 to the present day. Thus, the division between two English-speaking peoples, those of us in the United States today, and those who represented the British oligarchy, or the Anglo-Dutch oligarchy, the bankers, the thieves, became the leading force on the planet. Not necessarily the entirely controlling force, but the leading force. And thus, the role of the United States is built into the history of Europe. It's built into the history of civilization like an organic quality that we in the United States have adopted and have been given the destiny of creating the leadership to assist the rest of the world in becoming free of the British Anglo-Dutch liberal empire and its practices. That was Roosevelt's intention, his explicit intention. That was the intention of every great president we had, every great patriot this country had. We were considered a threat to Britain, to the British Empire, for this reason. Thus, it's built into the cultural relationships within the planet that when the United States takes the moral role, as it did under Roosevelt, and says we are concerned of finding ways of cooperation with other nation states on this planet to form a society of perfectly sovereign nation states which just enters into forms of cooperation in their common interest. We not try to dictate the internal characteristics of the government of these other nations. We simply cooperate with them as national personalities. And we, as a national personality, cooperate with these other nations as their national personalities and come to common goals and common ends, the common aims of mankind. Now, if we take that policy, not, who's the enemy? Who are we going to beat? We've got one enemy to beat, Anglo-Dutch liberal. The other enemies are simply fools who don't know any better. But we're supposed to know better. We must become again, we must recreate in this country a new political movement based on the legacy of Franklin Roosevelt, based on the legacies which many Republicans bear. A new political movement which adopts the idea of the United States as a unique, universal personality, which has a role to play on this planet for the benefit of humanity as a whole, and therefore for itself. It's the principle of Westphalia, the Peace of Westphalia. The benefit of the other. It's the principle of the modern nation state. The benefit of the other people. Because if you care for the benefit of the other people, you're going to be cared for yourself. You're going to create the kind of society in which you'll be cared for. You create justice for others, you create a climate of justice for yourself. You create a climate of progress, you create a climate of progress for yourself. But you're not looking for a system of relations among states based on adversarial considerations. Your system, while it may deal with adversarial problems, must, in the long run, rely upon non-adversarial issues like that of the Peace of Westphalia. It requires a process of getting to an agreement to come to an agreement among Russia, the United States, China, India, and other countries, which now probably include Italy and France and some others. Under those conditions, we, as a combination of powers, can dictate what the fixed exchange rate of the monetary system will be. We can dictate and regulate against inflation. We can create credit and large-scale creation of new technologies, new kinds of infrastructure. We can do these things, but we have to agree to agree. Then apply the power represented by that agreement among these powers and others who join them to crush that force which is imposing this hyperinflation upon the entire world. We, in nations which have this kind of science-driven culture among us and related culture, must mobilize ourselves away from this whole green environmentalist nonsense. It's all a lie. It's all a fraud. And get back to real science and have science driver programs which we in countries which have a higher degree of development can do, and use our brains and our ability to supply this kind of technology, technological improvement, to the poorest parts of the world. For example, Africa, black Africa, has the largest agricultural region of the world. But they don't get much to eat. Why? The bugs and everything else kills off the food. They don't have all the protection systems they need. They don't have a distribution system that protects them. So what do? We move in, we say, well, we're going to put in this international railway magnetic system, levitation system. So we're going to drive an international rail system or magnetic system into Africa. We're going to create, as a gift from the other nations of the world, we're going to give them as a gift a railway or maglev system, which is the basic system, which means that in these countries, they have the basic means to transport goods from one place to the other. That and also power systems and so forth delivered to them will enable them to do the rest. And that's the point. The way you develop a people is not by coming in and telling them how to do everything. You give them the things which will enable them to do something for themselves. And you help them do it.